No one ever expected Mary Bennet to be chosen, least of all by a man who could see straight through her silence. And yet, behind closed doors, in a moment no one was meant to witness, everything changed. Mary Bennet had spent most of her life being overlooked, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. In a family where beauty and charm spoke louder than thoughtfulness and depth, she had quietly accepted her place as the one who stood slightly behind, observing rather than participating. She was not unhappy exactly, but she was not seen either. And over time, she had learned to make peace with that quiet invisibility, convincing herself that a life of modest expectations was safer than risking disappointment. But everything began to shift the moment Tom Haywood entered her world. He was not like the others who passed through drawing rooms with rehearsed compliments and polite indifference. There was something unguarded about him, something sincere in the way he listened rather than simply waiting to speak. At first, their conversations were hesitant, almost uncertain, filled with pauses and unfinished thoughts. Mary, so accustomed to being misunderstood, chose her words carefully. Tom, on the other hand, seemed to find meaning even in her silences, as though he understood that what she could not say mattered just as much as what she did. It was in these small exchanges that something began to grow, something neither of them named, yet both quietly felt. Mary found herself thinking of him at unexpected moments, recalling the way he had looked at her, not with amusement or dismissal, but with genuine curiosity. It unsettled her, not because it was unpleasant, but because it was unfamiliar. She had never been the center of anyone's attention before, and now, without warning, she felt as though she had stepped into a space where she truly mattered. Tom, too, was changing in ways he did not fully understand. He had always believed himself to be a man guided by reason, by practicality, by the steady rhythm of a life carefully planned. Yet, with Mary, those certainties began to soften. He found himself lingering in conversations, searching for excuses to remain in her presence just a little longer. There was a quiet strength in her, a depth of feeling that revealed itself slowly like pages of a book one could not rush through, and the more he discovered, the more impossible it became to look away. Their connection did not announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Instead, it unfolded in moments so subtle they might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. A shared glance held a second too long. A conversation that drifted into unexpected honesty. A silence that felt comfortable rather than empty. It was not the kind of romance that demanded attention. It was the kind that quietly changed everything. Yet for all its quiet beauty, it was also fragile. Mary could not ignore the voice within her that reminded her of who she had always been. The sister no one chose first, the girl whose feelings were often set aside. Hope, she had learned, could be dangerous. And so even as her heart began to open, she held part of herself back, uncertain whether this growing closeness could truly belong to her. Tom, meanwhile, struggled with a different fear. He recognized the significance of what he felt, but he did not yet trust it fully. Was this merely admiration, born of novelty and curiosity, or was it something deeper, something that would demand more of him than he had ever intended to give? The question lingered between them, unspoken yet undeniable. And then, one evening, everything shifted. The house had grown unusually quiet, the kind of stillness that made even the smallest movement feel significant. It was by chance, or perhaps by something less accidental, that Mary and Tom found themselves alone, removed from the watchful presence of others. There was no audience, no expectations, no need for careful restraint. For the first time, there was only honesty. Mary felt it before she understood it. The subtle change in the air, the way the distance between them seemed suddenly too great, too deliberate. She could feel her heartbeat quicken, not with fear, but with a strange, undeniable anticipation. Tom stepped closer, not abruptly, but with a quiet certainty that made it impossible to mistake his intention. And in that moment, all the unspoken words between them seemed to rise to the surface. He did not speak immediately, neither did she. There was no need. The silence carried everything they had been unable to say, everything they had been too cautious to admit. It was as though time itself had slowed, waiting for them to decide what would come next. Mary could have stepped back. She could have returned to the safety of uncertainty, to the familiar distance that had always protected her from disappointment. But she didn't. Instead, she remained where she was. and that single choice change. Mary did not hear the footsteps at first. Her world had narrowed so completely to that single moment, to the warmth of Tom's hand, to the quiet certainty in his presence, that everything beyond it faded into insignificance. For once, she was not thinking about how she appeared, or what others might say, or whether she should step away before it was too late. For once, she allowed herself to feel. Tom, too, seemed to forget the world outside that room. The careful restraint he had held onto for so long slipped, not recklessly, but naturally, as though it had never truly belonged to him in the first place. His gaze did not waver, and in it, Mary saw something she had never dared to hope for, something steady, something real. "You do not have to hide from me," he said quietly, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Mary's breath caught, not because of the words themselves, but because of the truth within them. She had spent so long hiding, behind politeness, behind restraint, behind the expectation that she should ask for nothing, that the idea of simply being seen felt almost overwhelming. "I do not know how not to," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, and yet she did not pull her hand away. Tom stepped closer then, closing the small space that still remained between them. There was no hesitation now, no uncertainty in the way he moved. It was as though something had finally settled within him, a decision made not by logic, but by feeling. "You are not as invisible as you believe," he said, "not to me." The words landed gently, but their effect was anything but small. Mary felt something shift inside her, something long held in place, something she had never questioned because she had never imagined it could be different. And before she could retreat into doubt, before she could convince herself that this moment was too fragile to trust, Tom lifted his hand just slightly, as if giving her time to stop him. She didn't. What followed was not sudden, not rushed. It was careful, almost hesitant at first, as though both of them were aware of how much this moment mattered. When he drew her closer, Mary felt the steady rhythm of his breath, the quiet warmth of his presence, and for the first time, she did not feel uncertain about where she belonged. She belonged here, with him. Their embrace was not perfect. It was unsure, a little awkward, shaped by inexperience and restraint, but it was real, and in that honesty, there was something far more powerful than any practiced gesture. Mary closed her eyes just for a moment, allowing herself to exist fully in the feeling she had spent so long denying. There were no expectations here, no comparisons, no silent judgments waiting to follow, only him. And when he finally kissed her, it was not dramatic or overwhelming. It was quiet, almost tentative, and yet it carried the weight of everything they had been unable to say. Mary felt it instantly, not just the closeness, not just the unfamiliar sensation, but the meaning behind it. This was not curiosity. This was not a passing moment. This was something that had been building slowly and quietly, long before either of them had found the courage to acknowledge it. Tom pulled back only slightly, as though even that small distance felt too much. "I should have understood sooner," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Mary opened her eyes, her thoughts unsteady, her heart still racing. Understood what? She asked, though part of her already knew. That it was never supposed to be anyone else. The words lingered between them, undeniable now, and for a brief, perfect moment, nothing else existed, until the door opened. It was not loud, it was not sudden, and yet it shattered the quiet intimacy of the room in an instant. Mary turned, her breath catching as reality rushed back in all at once. Standing at the threshold was her mother, still silent, her expression unreadable in that first moment of shock. Time seemed to freeze. Mary stepped back immediately, the warmth of the moment slipping away as quickly as it had come. Her mind raced, searching for explanation, for justification, for anything that might undo what had just been seen. But there was nothing to say, because the truth was already clear. Mrs. Bennet's gaze moved from Mary to Tom, taking in the closeness that had not yet fully faded, the undeniable evidence of what had just occurred. For a brief second, something like surprise flickered across her face, but it did not remain. Instead, it was replaced by something else, something far more certain. Mary braced herself, expecting disapproval, expecting concern, expecting the familiar weight of judgment that so often followed moments she could not control. But it did not come. Instead, her mother stepped forward slowly, her expression shifting into something almost satisfied. "Well," she said at last, her tone measured but unmistakably decisive. This explains a great. The room felt different now. Only moments ago it had held something soft, something private. Something that belonged only to Mary and Tom. But now, with her mother's words still hanging in the air, that same space felt smaller, filled not with possibility, but with expectation. Mary could feel it pressing in on her. Marriage. The word echoed in her mind louder than anything else. It should have felt like a dream, something distant and unlikely. She had spent so long believing that such moments were meant for others, her sisters, girls with brighter smiles and easier charm, not her, and yet now suddenly it was being placed before her as though it had always been inevitable. Tom remained beside her, but something had shifted in him too. The quiet certainty he had shown just moments before was still there, but it was now mixed with something more complex. Responsibility, perhaps, or the weight of knowing that what had been private was now expected to become permanent. Mrs. Bennet, however, seemed entirely assured. "I will speak to your father," she said, already turning toward the door as though the matter were settled. "There is no reason for delay." And just like that, she was gone. The door closed softly behind her, but the silence she left behind was anything but gentle. Mary did not move at first. She stood where she was, her thoughts unsteady, her emotions tangled in a way she could not easily sort through. Just minutes ago, she had felt something clear, something simple even. Now everything felt uncertain again, but in a different way. This was no longer about whether Tom cared for her. It was about what that care meant, and whether it was enough. "I did not expect it to happen like this," Tom said at last, his voice quieter now, more thoughtful. Mary let out a small breath, almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Nor did I," she replied. There was a pause then, not uncomfortable but searching. Both of them seemed to be standing at the edge of something neither had fully prepared for. Tom stepped closer again, though more carefully this time. "Mary," he began, and there was something in the way he said her name, something more certain than before, yet more vulnerable too. "I would not have this decided for you. Not like this." She looked up at him, surprised. "You would not?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "No, what I feel, what has grown between us, it should not be reduced to obligation." He hesitated, choosing his words with care. "I would ask you properly, not because we were seen, but because I wish it." Mary felt something shift again, softer this time. Not pressure, choice, but even so, doubt lingered. "And if we had not been seen," she asked quietly, "would you still wish it?" It was not an accusation, it was a question she needed answered, not just for him but for herself. Tom did not answer immediately. For a brief moment his expression grew thoughtful, as though he understood the weight behind her words. "Yes," he said finally, his voice steady, "though perhaps I would have taken longer to find the courage to say it." There was honesty in that answer, not perfection, not certainty without flaw, but truth. And somehow that mattered more. Mary lowered her gaze, her thoughts still moving, still searching for something solid to hold on to. She had spent so long believing that love, if it came at all, would feel distant or uncertain, and yet what she felt now was neither. It was real, but it was also new, and that made it frightening in ways she had not expected. "I do not wish to be chosen simply because I must be," she said softly. Tom's expression softened at once. "And you are not?" he replied. "If anything, I fear I have been slower than I should have been in recognizing what was already clear." Mary looked at him again, searching his face, trying to understand whether she could trust what she saw there. "What is clear?" she asked. "That I have come to care for you in a way I can't easily set aside," he said. "That when I imagine what lies ahead, it is not anyone else I see beside me." The words settled between them, steady and certain. Mary felt her heart respond before her mind could fully catch up. There was something deeply grounding in the way he spoke. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, but sincere in a way that made it difficult to doubt. And yet, something still held her back. "Caring is not always enough," she said, almost to herself. Tom nodded slightly. "I know," he said, "which is why I would not ask for your answer now. Not because others expect it, but because you are ready to give it." That she had not expected. Mary had braced herself for persuasion, for urgency, for the quiet pressure that often followed such situations, but instead he offered her time, understanding, and something even rarer, respect. For the first time since her mother had spoken, Mary felt the tension in her chest ease. "I have bought speed bug." Mary could feel it before anyone even spoke the words out loud. The house had that particular kind of tension again, the kind that did not announce itself but settled into everything. Doors opened a little too often. Footsteps lingered a little too long. Conversation stopped just as she entered a room. And most of all, people looked at her differently, not as Mary Bennet, but as Mary Bennet and Tom Haywood. It was subtle at first, almost polite. But Mary was not used to being noticed, and so even subtle changes felt loud. Whispers followed her in hallways. Smiles arrived a moment too late, as though they had been prepared in advance. Even her sisters, who had rarely paid her romantic life much attention before, now watched her with curious interest. She felt exposed, not in the way she had feared before, but in a quieter, more complicated way. Because now everything had meaning, every glance could be judgment, every silence could be assumption. And through it all, Tom remained steady. If anything, he seemed even more composed now than before, as though the shift in attention had only clarified his intentions rather than shaken them. He did not avoid her. He did not hesitate when their paths crossed. Instead, he acknowledged her with a calm familiarity that only made everything more visible to everyone else. And that, in itself, changed everything again. One afternoon, as Mary stood by the window pretending to read, she heard her sisters speaking in low voices behind her. "She hardly speaks of anything else now," one of them murmured. "And yet no announcement has been made," another replied. Mary's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her book. They were speaking about her as though she were no longer present in her own life. But worse than that, they were speaking as though her future had already been written. That evening, her mother called her into the drawing room. Mary knew before she even entered that this was not a casual request. Mrs. Bennet was seated with unusual stillness, a letter resting neatly in her hands. There was something satisfied in her expression, but also something deliberate, as though she had already arranged every outcome in her mind. "Mary," she began, not unkindly, "we have received an invitation." Mary stepped closer cautiously. "An invitation?" "Yes," her mother said, tapping the paper lightly. "From Mr. Haywood's family. A visit. Formal. Proper." The word proper landed heavily in the room. Mary's heart shifted slightly. A visit meant more than politeness. It meant observation. It meant evaluation. It meant that whatever had begun between her and Tom was no longer confined to private moments or quiet understanding. It was now becoming something official, something public. "I see," Mary said carefully. Mrs. Bennet studied her for a moment. "You do understand what this means, do you not?" Mary hesitated. "I believe I do. But, in truth, she was not entirely sure, because what did it mean when something private began to take shape in a world that demanded certainty before feeling had fully formed? That night, Mary could not sleep easily. Her thoughts kept returning to Tom. Not just his words, not just his presence, but the way he had given her space, the way he had not forced an answer, the way he had not tried to shape her decision for her, and yet now everything around them was moving forward regardless. She found herself walking through the quiet corridors of the house later, unable to remain still. The silence felt heavier at night, as though it carried all the things no one said during the day. And then she saw him. Tom stood near the study, partially lit by the soft glow of a lamp. He looked tired, not exhausted, but thoughtful in a way that suggested he had been carrying more than just his own emotions. When he saw her, his expression softened immediately. "You are awake," he said quietly. Mary nodded. "I could not remain still," she admitted. There was a pause between them, familiar now but different.